Today I'm going to talk about learning English and how to use this podcast or other podcasts to learn English well, especially how to use podcasts to learn to speak English fluently, easily, quickly. And that's our goal. That's my goal at Effortless English, to help you speak English easily. Now, in school, you probably learned to read English. And I know you learned to analyze English. What does analyze mean? Well, analyze means to break it into parts. That's the direct meaning of analyze. So you take something whole, the English language, and then you break it into little small pieces, and you examine each little piece, and you try to make rules about each piece, and how does this piece go together with another piece. That's analysis is the noun, or to analyze is the verb. And that's what most of you learned in your school. You learned to analyze English. Unfortunately, you did not learn to speak English, and you did not learn to understand English well. And that's a problem, because most people who are learning English independently, okay, you want to learn it yourself, you have some reason, you really want to use it. Well, most people like that, most people like you want to speak it, right? You really want to communicate. You don't just want to pass some test. You really want to talk to people using English. You want to communicate using English. You want to listen to an English movie, a movie in English, and understand it. You want to make friends and talk to them using English. Maybe you need it on your job. You need to communicate with coworkers or customers. But for whatever reason, most of you really want to learn English to be able to use it, not just analyze it. And that's a big difference. It's very different. Knowing a language and using it is totally different than analyzing a language. And in school, you learned to analyze it. So you broke English into many parts, and you learned that there are nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs. And then you learned that there are clauses. There are independent clauses, and there are dependent clauses. And then you learned there are many verb tenses. There's the present perfect. There's the past perfect. There's the simple past. You probably learned that there are voices. There's the passive voice, for example. And then, of course, there's style. There's a lot of style elements if you're learning to write. So you learned all these pieces, and probably you know the names of these little pieces better than I do. And I know that you know these things better than most native speakers of English. Most Americans could not tell you what the present perfect is. If you said, "What is the present perfect?" to somebody on the streets here in San Francisco, most of them would say, I don't know. And if you said, "What is the past perfect progressive?" they would say, I don't know. I have no idea. They can't analyze English. They have not learned to analyze English. They learn some grammar, but the grammar we learn in school is for writing. We learn some formal written grammar for English. We learn that in high school mostly, a little bit in university. And it's helpful for writing academic papers, papers in university mostly. Not so helpful anywhere else. But for actually speaking the language, actually listening to the language and understanding it, actually communicating every day, writing a letter to your friends, writing emails, basic business communication, listening to movies, all the normal things we do every day, that does not require analysis. In fact, analyzing English will hurt your ability to communicate and use it. So right now, you need to decide, what do you want from English? Do you want to analyze it and know all the names of all the parts and know all the names of the verb tenses and the little grammar points? There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to get a PhD, a doctorate degree in linguistics, English linguistics, then you should study that. You should learn all the different grammar points and parts. If you want to write academic papers and do academic university research about English, then you should learn all of those parts and all of those names and all of those pieces. However, if your goal is to speak well, if your goal is to speak quickly and fluently, and when I say fluently, I mean you speak without translating, you speak without thinking. You have information and you immediately can communicate in English. You can say what you want to say. You don't need to you don't need to think and think and think, and you don't need to think in your language and then translate it to English. You can immediately communicate the information you have in English without thinking or translating. That's what I mean by fluency. Now, I don't mean perfection. Nobody's perfect. Native speakers make small grammar mistakes all the time. And in basic casual conversation, those are not even mistakes. They're the normal way we speak. So there's a different kind of grammar for writing, for formal writing, and for speaking. It's not the same. The rules are different. The vocabulary is different. The pronunciation, in fact. If you're reading something, your pronunciation will be different than if you are having a normal conversation. And this causes a lot of problems also for people learning English. So you have to decide. You need to decide right now, what do you want from English? Do you want to take tests and get degrees? Or do you want to really communicate with native speakers of English, with people in England, with people in Australia, with people in the United States, with people in Canada, etc. And also with other professional people from other countries. If a Japanese person wants to talk to a person in Thailand, usually they're going to use English. If a person in India wants to speak to a person in China, often they will use English. So you need to decide if that's your goal, real English, then you have to change the methods of study. What you learned in school will not help you anymore. Okay, you have some grammar knowledge, that's fine. You memorize some vocabulary, okay, that's okay too. But you're going to have to do something very different if you want to speak fluently, if you want to speak easily and understand quickly and easily. Now, the good thing is you can do this without stress. It can be very relaxing. And podcasts are a great way to practice speaking English and hearing English. The important point, the most important point is this. You must learn with your ears, not with your eyes. In school, you probably learned English with your eyes, right? You started by reading. Maybe you read directly in English, or maybe you read in your own alphabet, your own language, and then translated. But either way, you probably had a textbook, and most of the time, you were probably reading your little textbook and reading your workbook and then writing the answers down, right? If you were unlucky, perhaps if you learned English in Japan, for example, or Korea, your teacher probably spoke her or his native language more than they spoke English. So you were sitting in your English class, and the teacher's speaking Japanese most of the time. And maybe only a little bit of English. And then you're reading your book, and it has all the katakana, all the Japanese characters to tell you how to pronounce English, which of course is the wrong pronunciation. And the little bit of English that you actually did get was all with your eyes. You were reading the English in your textbook. You probably spent very little time actually hearing natural, real English from a native speaker. Even though you have studied 5 years or 6 years or 8 years of English, most of that studying was with your eyes. So you've got to change that. You've got to start learning English with your ears. You've got to start learning by listening. And in the beginning, this is scary. It's a little difficult because when you listen, you won't understand everything. As you listen to my podcast, there might be some parts you don't understand. That's okay. It's normal. And you have to accept that. You have to say, it's okay. I won't understand every word. I don't need to understand every word. I just need to understand most of the information. If you can't understand most of the information, don't go get a textbook and start learning with your eyes again. Just find some audio, some sound that's easier. Find something easier. This podcast can be a little difficult for beginners, for example. So beginners should find something much, much shorter and easier. But they should still learn by listening. They should still learn with their ears. If this podcast is too easy for you, you're thinking, oh, so boring, I know all of this. No problem. Find one that's more difficult. There are so many podcasts now on iTunes, for example, the iTunes store. You can also find, newscasts, CNN, BBC, and of course, movies. So many movies, American movies, British movies. So there's so much you can listen to. So point number 1, listen. Learn with your ears. Point number 2, listen to things that are mostly easy. Mostly easy. When I say mostly easy, I mean you should understand 90%, maybe 95% of the words. As you listen to this podcast, you should understand 95% of what I'm saying. If you understand less, maybe this podcast is too difficult for you. If you understand 100%, well, it's still good practice for you to listen. It still helps you. Repetition is important. But if you enjoy the content, if you enjoy listening, then keep listening. If it's boring for you, find something more difficult. But in general, look for things that are mostly easy. You should understand about 90%, maybe 95% of what you are hearing. TV shows, podcasts, movies, recorded conversations. Anything as long as it's real English spoken naturally by a native speaker. So that's point number 2. Mostly easy. So number 1, learn with your ears. Number 2, listen to things that are mostly easy. If something's too difficult, you will not learn. Finally, point number 3 about how to learn to speak easily and speak fluently. Repetition, 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 repetition. That means you must listen to things many times. One time is not really enough. For example, if you're using this podcast to learn some casual English, learn some slang, listening one time to each podcast, it's not really enough. If you're an advanced student, you might listen to one of the lessons, for example, the last lesson about rip-off, and you listen to it, and after you finish, you say, okay, I know rip-off, I understand it, I know the meaning. If I saw rip-off on a test, I could tell you the meaning, I would get the answer correct, so you think you know it. And, well, you do. At some level, you do know it, but you don't know it deeply. Okay, there are different levels of knowing a word, different levels of knowing a phrase, different levels of knowing English. One level is, conscious knowledge. So you see the word, you understand it, you can tell me the definition. That's the kind of basic level. You recognize the word. And then another level is that you hear the word and you can very quickly, you hear the word, you know what it means. So you hear rip-off and you don't need to pause, you don't need to think, rip-off, rip-off. You don't need to translate. You instantly, boom, you hear rip-off, you know what it means. No delay. But there's still a deeper level. The deeper level is you want to use the word rip off, and you instantly, it comes to your mouth. It comes out of your mouth, comes off your tongue without thinking. You instantly and effortlessly, without effort, can use that word or phrase. No thinking, no translating, no pause, no delay. That's the deepest level. So you listen to the podcast one time, you probably have level number 1. You hear it, you understand it, you could tell me the meaning. But probably you don't have that deep level. Probably tomorrow you're not going to suddenly say the word rip off naturally, without thinking, without trying. To get to that level, to reach that level, so you can use English without thinking, without trying, you have to listen many times. You have to hear that phrase many, many times. You have to hear it in different situations. And you have to practice using it some too. So I recommend with each lesson that you listen to it, each podcast, listen to it a few times. Listen to it several times. Not in one day. Listen to it today, and then tomorrow, listen to it again. And then the next day, listen to it again. Repeat it, 4 times, 5 times. It's your decision, but repeat it more than one time. Also, when you listen to my podcast, when you're listening to the mini story section, right? I will include a little story at the end of each lesson now, starting yesterday. Well, I ask questions when I tell that little story. When I ask the questions, pause your iPod or pause your computer and try to say the answer. Try to say the answer very quickly. So if I say, there's a boy, his name is AJ. What's his name? Pause. You should pause and say, his name is AJ. Try to say it very quickly. And I'll keep asking questions. Try to pause, answer the question, and then keep going. Pause, answer the question, keep going. Then you start learning English much faster, much more deeply. And that will help you really speak English easily, effortlessly, fluently. Okay, so let me just give you a conclusion here. In sum, there are 3 main points to learning to speak English well, to speak English easily. Point number 1, learn with your ears, not your eyes. Learn English with your ears. So important. Point number 2, listen to things that are mostly easy. Mostly easy listening. You should understand 90% or more. Okay, and point number 3, repetition. You have to repeat what you listen to many times so that you learn deeply. Deep learning. Deep learning is point number 3. Very deep learning, repetition. All right, good luck. I hope you will enjoy your English learning. I hope you will follow this method so that when you speak English, you can do it easily. It will be much more fun if you don't have to translate. Translating's not fun, it's stressful. If you speak very slowly, it's stressful. So try to learn with this method so in 6 months, in 1 year, you will be able to speak English quickly, easily, effortlessly. That's why I call it Effortless English. All right, and finally, as always, you can get my free newsletter with more ideas about learning English. Go to www.effortlessenglish.org. Effortless is EFFORTLESS. Effortlessenglish.org, my free newsletter about learning English. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.